Well, some disappointing news. I cannot find the spider. So I don't know what touched me. It might have been my imagination anyway, but I don't know where it went. Anyway, so how to buy happiness. So hopefully you enjoyed finding out that, like I said, donating oftentimes is a great way to actually have income be correlated with happiness. If, obviously if you're donating somebody else's money, that's really satisfying. But if you're donating your own because you have so much excess, it might help to stave off the dissatisfaction that can come from overconsumption. All right, I'm going to try not to sit here and think I'm being touched by a spider the whole time. All right, now this graph is depicting wealth and well-being based on country. And so they've got a color code here where they've color coded Australasia in green, the Americas in blue, Asia in red, Africa in gray, and Europe in yellow. And then they made the dots different sizes based on population. This is something that I noticed a lot during COVID is that they report countries oftentimes as this, like they would give us rates of cases and stuff, and they would give us raw data on how many cases different countries were having and not do any kind of correction for the difference in population size. The US is the third largest country in the world as far as population. And so you see that China is the biggest, has a big red circle. You see that India is the next biggest with a giant red circle also. They're pretty equivalent in size. We're about a third of the size population-wise of either of those two countries, but bigger than most other countries. Brazil is pretty close behind us. Indonesia is pretty close behind us. But so we're larger in population than just about everybody else besides China and India. Anyway, so I just thought I'd put that little correction in there for you. And so what you're seeing is on the left side is the level of satisfaction, the life satisfaction score that the country has based on some survey where they ask people how satisfied you are in your life. And I'll talk about that in a little bit later. And so it actually ranges from 1 to 7, or 1 to 10 is actually what it ranges from. But you'll notice on our left-hand side, it's going just really from 3 to 7. So most people are between 3 and 7. I mean, like even the least satisfied people the culture is rating as 3. And the most satisfied is not even near a 7, maybe 6 point something. Anyway, and then what we see is they put a little dotted line to indicate higher satisfaction with what they have. Lower satisfaction is below the dotted line with what they have. And so on average, you would expect to see, people, in cultures with more resources, being more satisfied. And what you're actually finding is that there are some outliers, right? Like Botswana has a growing GDP per capita, so it's getting more wealthy, but it's not being associated with greater life satisfaction. Hong Kong is one of the wealthiest countries in Asia, and their satisfaction scores are inordinately low. Actually, Kuwait also is a pretty wealthy country, and its satisfaction levels are pretty low. Singapore, same issue. So what we're seeing is on the right hand side are the wealthier, happier countries. On the left hand side are the poorer, less happy countries. You see that up towards the 6, 7. Up the 6, 7, you see the poor, happy countries. Down below the dotted line, you're seeing the wealthy, happy countries. So it's kind of a three-dimensional thing here that you're trying to read. So it's a little confusing, but like Algeria is a great example where it's an African nation that has higher life satisfaction than other African nations that have similar wealth. And so they sort of have a satisfaction level that seems to be a little independent of their wealth. Costa Rica is a good example. It's very happy, but it's not very wealthy. So, you can kind of look through here, see where different countries are and see, the US is on the wealthy, happy side. Is it the happiest? Not based on this particular scale for sure. And what you're going to find is really all the measures that we're going to talk about that compare nations. The US is not the happiest, but it's over there. It's over on the happy, wealthy side. All right. Why are you not animated? There we are. All right. Here's something kind of interesting that came from Egan et al. And they found that 82% of U.S. college students who are starting their freshman year said that being very well off financially is either very important or essential. So our college students, at least, that are coming in their freshman year, tend to report that, a financial motive is what's going to cause their lives to be satisfying, right? Like achieving a high level of income. And that's not uncommon among young people, right? Like they want to have a certain amount of income, but I mean, being very well off financially is more than just sort of, I want to be able to make a living, right? Like they want to be very well off financially. And that it's very important, or it's essential for them to be satisfied. Not all people around the world think that they need to be very well off. Like a lot of people around the world think that they need to have enough to support their family. And that's what they're going for. They want to have a work-life balance where they, have time with their family as well as they're able to support their family. Like, not all people all around the world have that same attitude of being, very well off as a super, prominent goal. So that's, I thought that was worth throwing in there. So, comparison is one of the things that we do that helps to determine how satisfied we might be. We look at how we're doing relative to other people. And so, for example, we find that satisfaction comes when we recognize our income rank. Are we doing better than most? Okay, we feel more satisfied by that rather than our actual income, right? Like you might have a raw number income that is more than 90% of the world earns. But when you're looking around at your peers, you might find it unsatisfying because you're like, well, but look what they have. Look what it's not what somebody else has. And that kind of comparison can contribute to what we call relative deprivation. That's the perception that one is worse off relative to the comparison group. So if your comparison group is your peers, you have a better chance of, sort of actively competing and doing, relatively as well as your peers. If your if your comparison group is like famous people that you see on TV, movies, YouTube, whatever, that's gonna be difficult to compete, right? Because you're looking at like the 1%ers as opposed to the people around you, the people who are like you, people who would be good comparison groups. Back in the olden days when people used to go to the mall, I don't know if you guys go to the mall or not, but back in the olden days when people went to the mall, a piece of advice was go to the mall and look at other people. Like just sit in the middle of the mall and watch people walk by and notice that most people are not, famous and super wealthy and wearing designer clothing. Like most people are walking around like normal people. And are you doing as well as they are? Maybe you can feel better, right? Like you won't feel as deprived if you realize, hey, I'm normal. I'm typical. I'm like the vast majority of people. I may not be the 1%er that I see on TikTok, but I might be, above the 50 percentile or something like that. And that's a really good exercise to sort of change your comparison group, right? Downward comparisons can really help boost our happiness as we realize, you know what, I'm lucky to be where I am, that I have a lot more than a lot of people have. And that can really boost satisfaction. So let's say, you're going to go out and you're going to buy your first car. You're like, okay, I can afford, either I'm going to buy it completely with cash. Wouldn't that be an amazing thing to be able to go buy a brand new car completely with cash? And you could be so proud. And so you look for a nice, sensible car that's going to get good gas mileage and be, protective in an accident and maybe last 5 or 10 years. And, you're being super sensible and you're really happy because I got this car. I can afford it. I can afford the monthly payment. This isn't going to be painful for me or at all. And I'm like really proud of my new car until I find out that one of my peers got, something better. And, little do you know that your peer is, completely struggling to make that car payment, or, maybe you were able to pay with cash and they have to make a car payment or other things. You don't think about that. You just think, well, but they've got this better, they got the better car. If we change our comparison group and not look at the person who maybe is willing to go into way more debt than we're willing to go into, or who, yeah, maybe for the moment is ahead of us financially, but maybe we have other things like sometimes people will put their money into a car and other people might be sensibly saving up for a down payment on a house, right? And so, yeah, I don't have the fanciest car. I have a sensible, and maybe it's 2022 right now, and maybe you really do go out and buy a 2018 sensible car, right? So that you can then save up to be able to do something else that you want to do, like go on vacation or something else that the person who bought the luxury car maybe doesn't get to do because they're busy showing off with their luxury car and serving as your comparison group that makes you feel bad, but it's not a real comparison. Like, you are functioning like this and in a positive way, and they're functioning like this, and it's actually not a positive thing. So we have to be really careful about choosing our comparison group wisely. That's just really important advice. So, happiness. What is happiness? Well, it's one of those things that's like defining love, isn't it? Like, what is love? I don't know. So how about if we say that people who rate themselves as happy. So in research, they've found that people who rate themselves as happy tend to have higher self-esteem, at least in individualistic cultures. That is not necessarily a correlation if you're in a collectivistic culture, because self-esteem is not an important factor in those types of cultures. So having high self-esteem, if you live here in the US, that's associated with being happy. Being optimistic, outgoing, agreeable, and humorous is part of being happy. So you probably know what optimism is, right? You probably know what it means to be outgoing. Sometimes people misunderstand what agreeable is. Agreeable does not necessarily mean that you go along with other people all the time. It just means that you're probably not as skeptical. If you're high in agreeableness, you're probably not as skeptical. Like some people think the opposite of agreeableness is disagreeableness. And then we think about like the disagreeable old curmudgeon who, says no to everything and whatever. That's not the opposite of agreeableness. The opposite of agreeableness is skepticism. So people who are agreeable, it is possible that they can be duped more readily. Agreeable people are more likely to be sort of bilked out of their money and things like that. So there are some negative aspects of agreeableness, but agreeable people also are a little bit more open to influence. And that can boost happiness if you're not stuck and saying, do it my way, but instead go along with other people's influence. That can boost happiness. And then humorous, people who are either good at making other people laugh or who find other people funny, right? Like you don't always have to be the joke teller. You could be the person who appreciates a good joke. Having close, positive, and lasting relationships. And again, some of that comes along with these personality traits that I just described, right? Because people who are more optimistic, outgoing, agreeable, and humorous tend to attract more friends and romantic partners. And so those two things might go together. They tend to have work and leisure that engages their skills. So they feel fulfilled in either their work or their hobby. It doesn't have to be that you get paid for the things that you're doing, but you're enjoying it and you feel like you get to use the skills or the abilities that you have. And then having an active religious faith, especially in those cultures that really value religion. Not all cultures do to equal amounts. And in fact, in some cultures, the US is getting sort of like this. If you have a religious perspective, oftentimes it's looked down on. And so it may not be as important in a culture like the US as it used to be to have an active religious faith. But even within the US, most of our data on an active religious faith and happiness and optimism, there is a very strong correlation between those things. I often have students who want to challenge that. I've had a lot of students who are like, I heard this in my positive psych class, and I don't believe it. And so we've done research to, for the purpose of the student's perspective, to falsify the hypothesis that religion is associated with happiness or religion is associated with optimism. And so far I have not had any college student data. I mean, I always do all my research on college students as my subjects, and I've never had a failure of the correlation between optimism and religion, and religion and religiosity is what we measure. How much you engage in your faith, how much you see it as part of your identity, those kinds of things. I've never had a failure of the correlation between happiness and life satisfaction and religious faith. So I personally have done research on it. People who are happy tend to sleep well, and they tend to exercise daily, even just small amounts, the 20 minutes that they tell you to do. It helps to dispel stress hormones and do things that actually may contribute to you being able to sleep better. A little bit of exercise helps you to do that general adaptation syndrome, kick you over into the parasympathetic nervous system component. Happiness seems not as related to things like age. A lot of times people, especially younger people, think, well, older people are like sadder or less optimistic or less happy. And there is no correlation between age and happiness. There's no correlation between sex. This says gender. This is what the researchers called it. And happiness. It's true that women are more likely to be diagnosed with depression, but they also are on the other end overrepresented in the joyful side. And so it kind of averages out to the same degree of happiness as men. And then physical attractiveness. A lot of times people think that, they would be happier if their nose was smaller, or they would be happier if their skin was clearer, or if their body was shaped differently, or things like that. And it turns out physical attractiveness is unrelated to happiness. That, really it's about self-esteem in general and your optimism and all these things, and really less about these superficial things that you would think might contribute to happiness. They don't seem to be related. All right, let's go ahead and segue into Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi talking about flow, and that kind of touches on that engagement in, activities that really use your skills, and how that can contribute to happiness. So enjoy Mihaly's TED Talk.